Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Lachlan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Mike Boland, and my guest today is Damian Rollison, who's Director of Market Insights at SOCi. So, Damian, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so we actually have a lot to get into. But first, sort of for the sake of context for our audience, a lot of our audience knows you well, but for those who don't, tell us a bit about yourself and your role at SOCi.
I wouldn't presume that anybody actually has ever heard of me, Mike, but I have been around for a long time. I usually have to tally it up in my head. It's going to be 20 years pretty soon in local search.
Wow.
I think about 18 years or something like that. At a variety of companies, but I've had roles in product development and in research and writing and spoken at some conferences, et cetera. And currently I'm the director of market insights at SOCi, where I've been for, it's going to be 3 years this summer, where I run this research department basically that looks at trends in, consumer behavior around local and also business activity. We especially specialize in multi-location brands, but a lot of our findings are pretty relevant across the board, I would say. The two big research releases that we do are the Local Visibility Index, which is about business performance in digital channels locally. This will be the 6th year that we've released that study. And then new this year is the Consumer Behavior Index, which is a study of consumer preferences and behaviors related to looking up and engaging with local businesses. Those are not the things I was intending to talk to you about today, but they are kind of the big tentpole things that we do in research and lots of other findings as well.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that we have sort of a similar tenure in the local search world. For me, it was 2005, which is about 19 years, but slightly differently because I've been sort of in an analyst perspective on the sidelines, watching all this stuff. But in that light, I've always sort of considered you like an honorary member of the analyst corps because you do a lot of analyst-y things, right? Like you mentioned a lot of them, producing reports, a lot of research, a lot of publishing and thought leadership. Your Monday memo that you were doing for a while was sort of a must read for me and a lot of the folks in the industry. So you're certainly a voice in that capacity. So sort of in that light, what I'm wondering is, what are you looking at now? I mean, you have the benefit of having your finger on the pulse of a lot of great data. What are you looking at now that's sort of notable? What's trending? What jumps out?
I would say that there are two big trends for this year, and I don't think either one of them is going to come as a surprise to your listeners. The first one, I mentioned the Consumer Behavior Index a second ago. I will touch on one of the findings, which has to do with the use of social platforms for a use case that we would tend to think of more as a search engine use case. So in the consumer report, we asked consumers which sites or apps have you used in the last 30 days to look up local businesses. And although Google is the winner of that contest across all age groups, as you would not be surprised to hear, when we drill down to different age groupings amongst 18 to 24-year-olds, actually Instagram and TikTok beat Google.
Huh.
So, and a lot of people who, when I share that finding, especially if you're maybe not 18 to 24, they say, how would you even do that? Right. And so searching for a local restaurant or really lots of different kinds of businesses on TikTok and also Instagram is actually an activity that we need to really pay attention to, because not because local search is some special use case that suddenly TikTok is so good at that. It just happens to belong to a larger set of content, a content type on these platforms. And I think TikTok is really the driver of this trend, where people use it as a search engine for all things, right, including local. So that's kind of the big trend number one. And then the other one is, of course, about generative AI. Maybe even less of a surprise. ChatGPT launched in November 2022, I believe. Last year was the year when everybody woke up to the potential of AI, and I think this year could be defined as when that potential becomes a reality. I think, there's, as we're recording this, rumors that next week at Google's I/O event, they might unveil make some big announcement about search generative experience coming to google.com or something kind of like that. And then the other rumors that are, swirling right now have to do with a similar type of announcement from OpenAI about launching a search engine. Of course, OpenAI already does support search in a lot of ways, but more of a full bore search engine, you might say. And anyway, that news and all the related things are causing us to, number one, really pay attention to generative AI as it may impact and even fundamentally transform how we do SEO, even what we call SEO. Is it properly called that anymore or something else? And also, really wanting the brands that we work with and sort of businesses in general to gain an awareness that whereas we used to care, still do care quite a bit about how well we're performing in terms of things like the Google 3-pack, we also need to start paying attention to how are you showing up in these generative AI results, and where does that data come from, and what am I supposed to be doing about that, and what are the priorities as they may be, shifting as we speak. What are the priorities I should be paying attention to?
Yeah. So a lot of that sort of speaks to the evolving sort of flavors of search and what we consider to be search. Like, for example, one of those examples you gave in terms of the different younger age groups that are using places like TikTok as search engines. And I'm probably one of those folks in the older buckets that are asking, how would you even do that?
Right.
And it's interesting because those products are let's take TikTok, for example, is primarily a feed-based discovery engine. So I imagine there's a lot of sort of discovering happening, which businesses also want. But in terms of that lean forward, intent-driven search, it's interesting that they're also doing that. So what are you seeing in terms of the user behavior? It seems is like leading some of this, whereas the technology and what's being offered to them is sort of leading some of it as well. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I think so. I think in terms of the way you're characterizing the typical TikTok search behavior, or maybe the unique value proposition of TikTok, what does it all add up to? Certainly that For You algorithm, the thing that's going to give you that passive user experience of seeing interesting content without the need to follow things or like things in order to make that happen, that's the transformative fact about TikTok. The reason why the potential ban caused my own daughter to say, China can have all my data, but don't take my TikTok, right? I mean, it's very popular for that reason. But the other side of it that I think is less well understood, unless you're in that age group or in that group of users, or you talk to somebody who is that it's used as a search engine with keyword driven results on a very broad basis. So basically the user expectation and the ecosystem, you might say, of content was built around the algorithm. But after that, now that it's got millions and millions of videos on every topic under the sun, you can use it to find out about what's happening with the Gaza situation, or the presidential election, or topics in history. And in a very granular sense, you can find exactly the answer that you're interested in, but also that answer is delivered by a person who feels like a peer that you can trust, and in a way that you can consume so easily because it's delivered in this short form video format, which is so appealing. And so its use as a search engine is kind of where I'm, focusing my attention right now, because of how it's impacting the performance of businesses in a way that I think flies totally under most of their radar right now.
Right.
They don't even know it's happening. Right. And it's not like oh, go find an influencer. I mean, that certainly may make sense. And a lot of brands are already doing that. But I think step one is just like get on the platform and figure out what's happening, what
Yeah.
conversations are happening around your vertical.
Yeah.
And how can you insert yourself into those in a way that is not ham-fisted, but actually feels organic to the platform, which is not easy to do.
Yeah. Well, TikTok, we always say, has a specific language, right? It has a specific sort of production language in terms of sort of a lot of jump cuts, a lot of just raw, genuine stuff. And, you can't just take your 30-second ad spot and throw it on there. It won't fly. And and
Right.
and that's one of the challenges. You mentioned it flies under their radar. There's a higher sort of barrier to entry there because of, one, knowing that language, but also sort of some video production, right? As
Yep.
opposed to something like search, which, is sort of onerous for some businesses and not their natural language, but, showing up to claim your Google business profile, doing a few things with text and maybe images might be a lower bar than asking someone to sort of create content for a platform like TikTok.
Yeah.
But moving on to some of those other, let's stick with the theme of flavors of search that are evolving. So, that's interesting. Some of the feed-based social channels are becoming that. And then also you mentioned some of these AI tools are being used as search engines. That makes sense. I mean, that's something that you're showing up somewhere to get information. And it would seem like that is disruptive in some ways to the search that we know and love today.
Mhm.
In terms of just an alternate place, or sometimes it's not alternate. I mean, a lot of this is Google leaning into it as well, and Microsoft and others. So that end of things,
Mhm.
AI tools as search engines. What are
Yeah.
you seeing there in terms of either the user behavior or the innovation on the provider end, in terms of sort of adapting to this changing expectation around, AI is now either part of or replacing my local search?
It's funny how that conversation sort of parallels the TikTok conversation
Mm-hmm.
in a certain sense, because just like with TikTok, there's a lot happening that you may not be aware of unless you're in it. So too with generative AI. So
Yeah.
SGE, Search Generative Experience, launched at I/O last year, right? And it's been around for roughly a year now. And 6 months ago, I can remember, well, I wrote about this at the time, and I remember what the user experience was like. And of course, when I'm using these tools that are supposed to have a search component, but also utilize generative AI, immediately I'm going to do Starbucks near me, Mexican restaurant near me, because that's the world I live in, that we
Yeah.
live in. And so how does it do with those kinds of queries? So for instance, for SGE, last summer roughly, I wrote about the results when you search for restaurants in Chicago that are good for large groups. And it gave me a reasonable result. And then I tried to do what AI, one of the big promises of AI and SGE in particular is that I can drill down and get exactly what I'm looking for. I don't have to start over again, right?
Yep.
Sundar Pichai talked about this quite a bit. I can follow one conversation until the answer that I needed is presented to me. And so I said, okay, these restaurants are great, but show me which ones have good options for vegans. And at the time, SGE actually started over again and gave me a list of completely different restaurants. And I'm
Huh.
like, well, they're not there yet, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good, but the proof is in the pudding, and it just wasn't really there, fulfilling its own promise. Well, I would invite anybody to go try it again if you haven't done that recently, because SGE has solved that problem. And not only that, we did a study. We wanted to know, like, how are these generative AI platforms doing? Are they fulfilling, local search queries? Can they actually handle that type of query? Where are they getting their data from? And what is the quality of that experience in terms of, does it give you a useful result? Is it really near me if I ask for something near me? Does it give you things like a photos or a map to help orient you, about these businesses? And we scored the generative AI platforms on all of these criteria. We're about to publish this finding, but I can give you kind of a preview of it.
Nice.
Uh, Gemini wins. So I actually thought SGE might, but they're kind of a close second. But both of all the tools we studied, which were Gemini, SGE, Bing, which is now called Copilot, ChatGPT, Meta AI, which is still kind of brand new in terms of having its own website and platform, but we pulled that in, and then also Perplexity, which a lot of people talk about as being kind of on the cutting edge for this, right? So amongst all of those tools, Gemini and SGE provided the best user experience for local queries by a significant margin. And the defining factor there, so some of the other tools pull in data from some other sources, like Yelp is one that shows up quite a bit. Gemini and SGE pull in data primarily from Google Maps, as you might expect, right?
Right.
Some content from the brand's website, but really Google Maps is the primary source. And so that's good news really for local marketers, because a lot of the things that we've been advocating for years are still quite relevant.
Yeah, they're future proofed. If what you said is true, all the SEO work they've been doing sort of carries over into this world. Would that be a fair way to say it?
Yes, but if you haven't been paying attention to those priorities, and really, I want to emphasize what they are. It's not just get your NAP correct and accurate across 150 websites or something. That's actually the old school, like the 10 years ago version of
right.
The contemporary version of things, like if you look at leaning on things that are already best practices but are even more important now, you can think about local search ranking factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the report, as we know, that was started by David Mim many years ago and is now produced by Darren Shaw. In the most recent version of that, citation building had a 7% share in terms of what's important in local ranking. Every other factor, the most important being Google profile optimization itself.
Yep.
There's other factors as well. That makes up 93%, right? So that's really a good gauge of how things should be weighted in terms of what you pay attention to. But again, it's not just about NAP. You have to go pretty deep. So, for instance, when we ask these questions in order to generate the results that I'm describing, we looked for Mexican restaurant near me, grocery store near me, sporting goods near me, a couple of other general queries, and then also Starbucks near me. So we'd have a little bit of branded search in there. So it covers a good range.
Yeah.
And we asked these follow-up questions, right? And the follow-up questions were like, do you have good vegan options for the Mexican restaurant? And what we found was Gemini is going to go look, and so will SGE, at whether you have a menu listed in your Google profile. And if you do, and if it calls out that information, then you're going to provide a good answer for that user.
Makes sense.
But if you didn't update your menu, or if it isn't even there, then you're going to lose out. You're going to be, in that decision tree, you're not going to get to the next branch. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely does.
Yeah. This is where the deep profile optimization is what I'm trying to get to. That's what really is going to make a difference, and even more so in the world of AI.
So a lot of the SEO fundamentals aren't necessarily changing. That's good news, but they're more important than ever in terms of being signals for being present in these sort of new flavors of search. So first, I want to pause and define a few things for our non-technical listeners, because you mentioned a few different products like Gemini and SGE. SGE, of course, being search generative experience. That's something that Google is, as you mentioned, they launched it last year at I/O, and they've slowly been sort of integrating it into search, and it's sort of meant to be a component of search. People can now access it by signing up for I believe it's an open beta that you can sort of sign up to experience. And then Gemini is its own sort of insular app that's built on the Gemini technology, which is something different. Google's caused a little bit of confusion with that. So that ties back to your earlier speculation, or just watching some of the rumor mill. And full disclosure to our audience, at this time of recording, this hasn't happened yet, but it may in the next few days. But we can still speculate on it, and that's still relevant. If OpenAI comes out with a search engine, we see the continued integration of SGE into the core search experience. You see Gemini, you see Bing, you see others. What does the world look like next year at this time, in terms of that somewhat fragmented marketplace, in terms of what it means for local businesses?
Well, there's some level of fragmentation. We certainly did look at a broad base of generative AI tools to produce the findings that I was just discussing. But I think we can overstate what the fragmentation really means from the perspective of local businesses trying to market themselves, or really from a lot of the perspectives that matter here.
Mm-hmm.
The major players are still mostly Google and OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
Bing relies heavily on OpenAI, but has not managed to gain significant market share in comparison with Google. Perplexity, is able to raise a lot of money and get a lot of attention, but in terms of users, still not there. So I don't really think a year from now things look massively different than they do today. However, there may be some differences that matter a lot in our world. So, for instance, SGE has been typically delivering 5 local results instead of 3. And when we've seen in the wild that SGE results, or AI-powered results for local queries, are now showing up even when you don't opt in, but only in a limited way, it's still 5 results, not 3. So for you and me, death of the 3-pack, that's a headline,
Yep.
For the general consumer, it's a difference that they may notice or they may not really notice. But in terms of, the chances that you have to appear on page 1, I mean, that's a big deal for businesses. So sure, those differences, if they manifest, are going to cause us to change our tactics somewhat. There's still some mystery around how to optimize for AI results, but I think we can be pretty sure that AI is not interested in going broad with the way they source information because of the problems of hallucination and incorrect information, which are so high on they're so prominent in consumers' minds as problems that AI has encountered and presented. So it's not about a broad base of sites. Like in our world, we would say, broad base of directories of the past, the yp.coms and the MapQuests and other sites like that, where it used to be important to list yourself because of various reasons, but now they don't really get any consumer traffic. They aren't really important anymore. And therefore, because AI is going to really want authoritative sources, it's going to be defaulting to the Google Maps, the Yelp, the Bing as a search engine, the brand website, and a couple of other sources. When we did our study, we found, for instance, hotels near me was a search that we performed, and we found that many AI tools are, for that query, they're going to bring in hotels.com or Expedia, highly trusted authoritative sources still. But, there is a little bit of variety when it comes to those different queries. All of that comes under the heading of retrieval augmented generation, or RAG,
Yep.
right? Which, a lot of AI tools are actually very good at now. They have these sort of targeted ways of going out to the internet and getting the answer for a query when they interpret the intent in a certain way. And when they see a local query, they're going for those just a few highly authoritative sources, which, by the way, are again the same ones that we've been advocating that you
Sure.
spend a lot of time on, right? So if you've been neglecting those priorities, if your Google business profiles are out of date, if you don't have a lot of good photo content on Google and Yelp and so on, you're going to lose out even more. You're going to have even more chances to lose out.
Yeah.
than you did before. But if you're really strong in those areas, you're just going to see, people really worry about the complexity of the search journey with AI, how many different branches it can go down when the promise is that it's going to give you the exact answer. I need a pet friendly hotel, but it has to be in this neighborhood. And these are my reservation dates and, whatever else my priorities are, this very specific query, right? It's impossible to optimize for every single consumer need.
Yep.
But as long as you're providing all of that differentiating information, keeping it up to date, filling out all those fields, enabling all of those features, you're going to win in the searches where you should win, right? And that's going to be more efficient, faster, hopefully a more pleasing user experience than it was before. But the brands who are not paying attention to those priorities are definitely not going to win.
Yeah. And some of the keywords there are differentiation, authority, and those are just, going back to the theme of those long-standing best practices that are going to carry over to this world. So that's interesting. So that's actually all the time we have, and we can sort of end it on that sort of forward-looking note of what local businesses should be doing and thinking. So I want to thank you, Damian, for joining us. This has been fun.
Thanks so much, Mike. This was really fun. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at localogy.com. So please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. And if you're interested in being a guest or sponsor, you can email us at podcast@localogy.com. So I'm Mike Boland. Our producer is Dara Sweat. This week's guest has been Damian Rollison. You can find out more about Damian and SOCi in the show notes. So thanks for listening, and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Loughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.